In this podcast episode, Ben Shapiro expresses deep frustration with the current state of the Democratic National Convention and the political landscape surrounding Kamala Harris, the Democratic nominee for president. Shapiro's irritation stems from what he perceives as a concerted effort by the Democratic media to misrepresent the candidates and their policies, particularly Harris, who he describes as a manipulative, chameleonic, corrupt careerist. He argues that the media's portrayal of Harris as a symbol of hope and joy is disingenuous, given her lack of substantive political achievements and her evasiveness in addressing critical questions. Shapiro criticizes the media for its glowing coverage of Harris, suggesting that it is a facade designed to distract from her actual record. He argues that Harris has not answered any questions in over a month, and her campaign seems to rely heavily on vibes rather than concrete policies. He also takes aim at other prominent Democrats, including Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, and Joe Biden, accusing them of being radical leftists who have failed to address pressing issues like crime and economic instability. Despite the media's attempts to paint a rosy picture of Harris's campaign, Shapiro points out that the polling data tells a different story. Harris is leading by a slim margin of 1.5 points nationally, which is well within the margin of error. In key battleground states, her position is even more precarious, with polls showing her either tied or trailing in several critical areas. Shapiro notes that this lack of a decisive lead is particularly concerning given the extensive media coverage and the expectation that Harris should be pulling away from her opponents. He suggests that the perception of her as a strong candidate is not reflected in the actual polling data, which could pose significant challenges as the election approaches. Another piece of troubling news for Harris is the potential withdrawal of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. from the race, with reports indicating that he may endorse Donald Trump. Shapiro emphasizes that Kennedy's candidacy has siphoned votes from both Trump and Harris, and his endorsement could provide a significant boost to Trump's campaign. Polling data indicates that Kennedy's supporters are more likely to lean toward Trump than Harris, which could further complicate her path to victory. Shapiro argues that if Kennedy drops out and actively campaigns for Trump, it could shift the dynamics of the race in a way that is detrimental to Harris. Shapiro also highlights the deteriorating economic conditions as a significant hurdle for Harris's campaign. Recent reports indicate that the job market is weaker than previously reported, with a substantial downward revision of job growth figures. This economic downturn is compounded by rising inflation and the Federal Reserve's potential decision to lower interest rates. Shapiro argues that Harris's economic policies are likely to exacerbate the situation rather than improve it. He expresses skepticism about the Democratic Party's ability to address economic issues effectively, particularly given Harris's track record and the party's radical leftist tendencies. The final piece of bad news for Harris revolves around her administration's immigration policies, which Shapiro describes as a complete failure. He cites a recent report indicating that the Biden-Harris administration has lost track of over 320,000 migrant children who crossed the border without their parents. This situation raises serious concerns about the safety and well-being of these vulnerable children, many of whom are at risk of exploitation and trafficking. Shapiro argues that this failure to manage immigration effectively reflects poorly on Harris and the Democratic Party as a whole, further undermining her credibility as a candidate. Throughout the podcast, Shapiro expresses disdain for the reliance on celebrity endorsements and the superficiality of the DNC's messaging. He criticizes the party's focus on emotional appeals rather than substantive policy discussions, highlighting the disconnect between the Democratic Party's narrative and the realities facing American voters. Shapiro argues that the DNC's reliance on celebrity figures like Oprah Winfrey and Amanda Gorman detracts from the serious issues at stake in the election. He contends that voters should be focused on the candidates' actual policies and their potential impact on the country, rather than being swayed by celebrity culture.